You have been waiting for a sign, some small flicker of confirmation that it is working, that something out there received what you sent and is quietly moving on your behalf. So you check. You check your account. You check your messages. You check the way the day is going, and you read all of it like weather. Nothing has changed, and the checking itself has started to feel like the only part of this you are actually doing. There is a man in the Bible who was handed the exact opposite instruction. He was 99 years old. His wife was 90 and had never borne the son they were promised. And he was told to stop waiting for the thing to arrive and instead to start calling himself by the name of the man who already had it. He laughed, face down on the ground, laughing, and the text does not soften it. He took the name anyway. About a year later, the boy was born, and when they named that child, they named him after the laugh. Almost everything you have been taught about this puts you on the receiving end. You send something out, and then you wait to be answered. Neville Goddard anchored his teaching on a single verse that puts you on the other end of that line entirely. And the whole difference sits inside one verb that most people read straight past. Let us start with what you have actually been doing, because it has a name, and it is not doubt. You have been monitoring. Monitoring feels like faith from the inside. It feels attentive, and serious, and involved. You sit down, you do the inner work, you get up, and then some part of you stays on duty, scanning the day for evidence. Think about how that actually runs. The phone lights up, and there is a half second, before you even see who it is, where something in you asks whether this is it. An email arrives from someone who owes you money, and your chest moves before you open it. A number in an app goes up by a little, and the whole afternoon feels different. Then a bill lands, and it all drops out from under you, and you tell yourself you need to get back to it tonight. Do it properly this time. Really feel it. You are reading the outside world for a verdict on the inside one. All day, dozens of times. And here is the quiet problem with that. A person who is monitoring is a person who is waiting to find out. Waiting to find out is the posture of somebody who does not yet have the thing. So the state you are actually occupying, hour after hour, is the state of not knowing yet. You keep returning to it every time you check. You cannot check your way out of that. The checking is the state. Now to the verb. The verse is Romans chapter 4, verse 17. In the King James Version, it reads like this: As it is written, I have made thee a father of many nations, before him whom he believed, even God, who quickeneth the dead, and calleth those things which be not as though they were. Read the last part again slowly. Calleth those things which be not as though they were. There is no waiting in that sentence. There is no requesting in it either, and nothing is being detected on its way. The verb is calls, speaks to, addresses by name, while the thing being addressed is still, in the plainest sense, not there. That is a verb of output. Whoever does it stands at the sending end of the line. The thing has not shown up yet, and the addressing happens anyway. Paul puts that sentence in the middle of an argument about a specific man. And if you go back and look at what happened to that man, you find the verse acted out in the most literal way imaginable. Genesis chapter 17, verse 5. Neither shall thy name any more be called Abram, but thy name shall be Abraham, for a father of many nations have I made thee. Look at the tense. Have I made thee? Nothing there is scheduled for later. There is no I will make thee, no I intend to, no conditional clause about the conditions holding or the faith staying strong. Have made. Already done. Finished business, announced to a man of 99 standing in front of exactly 0 evidence for it. The claim arrived as a statement about the present, with his own age and his wife's barrenness contradicting it. Nothing about it was filed for later. And notice what was actually handed to him. There was no feeling to generate here, no technique, no session, no 15 minutes of practice in the evening. He was given a name. This is the part that gets skipped, and it is the whole mechanism. A name is something you answer to rather than something you perform. Abraham means father of a multitude. That was now what people called him, out loud, constantly, in the ordinary business of a day. Somebody wanting his attention across a field shouted it. A trader closing a deal with him said it. His servants used it 100 times between morning and dark. Each time, he was addressed as the father of a multitude. Each time, the promised child did not exist. And be precise about what was missing, because the text is, he was not a man with an empty house. He already had a son, Ishmael, born to Hagar when he was 86, and Genesis 17, verse 25, tells us that boy was 13 years old on the day all of this happened. What he did not have was the son he had been promised through Sarah, and Sarah is the one the promise names. So the name he now carried did not merely outrun his circumstances. It outran them in the one direction everybody around him could see, was closed. He did not get to do this quietly for 15 minutes. He wore it into every conversation he had, in front of everyone who knew his situation. That is what makes a name different from a feeling. A feeling is something you generate on purpose and then lose the moment you get distracted. A name is structural. It sits underneath your ordinary sentences, and it keeps operating without your attention. It works the way the things you genuinely believe about yourself already work, which is to say, without effort and without checking. Nobody shouts an ancient title at you across a field. You live among email signatures and small talk and people who mostly do not think about you at all. So where exactly is your name being used? It is being used in the sentences you say about yourself. That is the modern version of the field. Somebody asks how things are going, and an answer comes out before you have decided anything. A price gets mentioned, and you hear yourself make the small joke you always make. An opportunity comes up, and there is a first sentence that arrives, unbidden, about whether that sort of thing is for people like you. You did not compose any of those. They came out finished. That is the name you are currently wearing. Notice that you never chose it deliberately either. You inherited it from somewhere, and then you confirmed it, out loud, several times a day, for years, without once calling it a practice. It has had far more repetitions than any technique you have ever tried. Now, the laugh. Genesis, chapter 17, verse 17. Then Abraham fell upon his face, and laughed, and said in his heart, Shall a child be born unto him that is 100 years old, and shall Sarah, that is 90 years old, bear? That is in the book. Nobody hid it, and nobody softened it. Handed the claim, his first physical response was to go face down on the ground and laugh at it. And the thing he said inside himself was a straightforward arithmetic objection. The verse has him asking whether a child can be born to a man of 100, and whether Sarah at 90 can bear. He ran the numbers, and the numbers said no. There is a real tension here, and it deserves to be handled honestly rather than smoothed over. Paul, writing about this same man much later, says in Romans 4 that he considered not his own body now dead, and that he staggered not at the promise of God through unbelief. Set side by side, those two accounts pull against each other. Genesis records the laugh. Paul, looking back across an entire life, describes a man who did not abandon the thing. Both are in the same Bible. The honest thing to say is that something sits between them, and what sits between them is 1 year of carrying the name. The laugh happened at the start. It was his reaction to the announcement, not his verdict on the rest of his life. He got up off the ground and wore the name anyway. And the name is what Paul was reading a lifetime later. So if you have been waiting to stop finding this ridiculous before you begin, you have been waiting for something that did not happen to him either. He did not wait for the moment where it stopped sounding absurd before he started wearing the name. He got a name, he used it, and it sounded absurd in his own mouth while he used it. And he was not alone in that. 2 verses earlier, in Genesis 17, verse 15, his wife is renamed as well. And God said unto Abraham, As for Sarai thy wife, thou shalt not call her name Sarai, but Sarah shall her name be. She laughed too. Genesis 18 records her laughing within herself at the same claim, and her objection was as practical as his. 2 people, both renamed, both having laughed at the arithmetic of the claim, both answering to the new names in front of a household that could see the situation perfectly well. This exact operation sits underneath Neville Goddard's core teaching, and he was careful about the word he used for it. His term for it was the law of assumption. In 1952, in The Power of Awareness, he wrote the sentence his students have been repeating ever since. An assumption, though false, if persisted in, will harden into fact. Take that sentence seriously, because it contains an admission most teachers in this space will not make. He says, though false, he is telling you outright that at the moment you take it up, the assumption is not true, and that you will know it is not true, and that this is the normal condition of the thing rather than a sign you are doing it incorrectly. The load-bearing words there are persisted in. Nothing in that phrase asks you to intensify anything, or to believe harder, or to reach some threshold of conviction. Persisted in is a word about duration. And duration is a thing you can actually do on a day when you feel nothing at all. 1 point of vocabulary is worth getting right, because it gets muddled constantly online. Neville Goddard taught the law of assumption. The phrase law of attraction was never his. It belongs to a different tradition, and it carries a different picture entirely, one where the thing exists somewhere else and gets pulled toward you. That picture is the receiving posture again, wearing nicer clothes. Assumption contains no somewhere else. There is nothing at a distance to be drawn in, only a state to be inhabited by the person for whom the thing is already unremarkable. And notice the tense he chose when he named the inner texture of that state, back in 1944, in Feeling is the Secret. He called it the feeling of the wish fulfilled. Fulfilled. Already accomplished, exactly like have I made thee. The text is unusually specific about the arithmetic. Genesis 17, verse 24, tells us Abraham was 99 at the time all of this happened. Genesis 21, verse 5, tells us he was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. About a year. Be careful with that number, because the text gives ages rather than dates. So the honest way to say it is that he was 99 when the name changed, and 100 when the boy arrived. Call it a year. Somewhere around a year of being addressed as the father of a multitude by people who could see that Sarah had borne nothing. Sit with how long that actually is. A weekend does not cover it, and neither does anything shaped like a 21-day challenge. 4 seasons of acclaim contradicted by his own household every morning, with no partial credit anywhere along the way. Nothing arrived gradually. There was no halfway mark where the thing was visibly half done, and he could feel encouraged by the trend. For an entire year there was nothing to check. And then there was Isaac. That gap is where nearly everyone stops. The gap itself is not unusually cruel. What does the damage is that nobody told us there would be one, so we read it as a verdict. Nothing is happening becomes it is not working becomes it does not work for me. And the quitting almost never feels like quitting. It feels like being reasonable. It feels like finally being honest with yourself, which is the most convincing disguise it could possibly wear. He had one advantage in that year, and superior faith was not it. His practice was not optional. His name was being used by other people whether he was in the mood or not. He could not skip a day, and he could not forget. The structure carried him through the stretch where his own enthusiasm would not have. So make yours structural too. What happened here was no session and no ritual, and no object was involved that anybody carried around. None of that is in the text, and none of it is what Neville Goddard taught. What happened was a change in what a man answered to. So go find the sentences you say about yourself in ordinary conversation. The small automatic ones. Whatever comes out of you when somebody asks how things are going. That half-joke about money you have made so many times you no longer hear yourself make it. Those sentences are where your name actually lives, far more than any quiet 15 minutes, because those are the ones running unsupervised. Change what you answer to there. Stop confirming the old one out loud. That is a much smaller and much more available act than trying to summon a feeling on command. And unlike the feeling, it does not collapse the moment you get busy. The first few times you decline to say the old sentence, you will feel like you are getting away with something. There will be a beat of silence where the joke used to go, and it will sit there, and you will want to fill it with the old line, just to make the moment comfortable again. That silence is the entire practice. It is the same silence Abraham stood in every time somebody called him the father of a multitude, and he had to answer to it with the promise still unkept. You will also catch yourself checking whether it is working, which is the monitoring coming back in through a side door. Let it come. Noticing that you have started scanning again is not a failure of the practice. It is the practice, running, and expect it to sound false in your own mouth. He fell on his face laughing, and the name held anyway. Then there is how it ends. The boy was born, and they named him Isaac. In Hebrew the name is Yitzhak, and it comes from the root tsachak, which means to laugh. That connection is not a scholarly reconstruction laid over the text afterward. The text makes it itself. Genesis 21, verse 6. And Sarah said, God hath made me to laugh, so that all that hear will laugh with me. Both of them had laughed at the claim in the moment they received it, and the outcome, when it finally arrived, was named after that laugh. Nobody edited the laugh out. It was not treated as the disqualifying detail, or the thing to be ashamed of, or the reason the whole arrangement should have been withdrawn. It got carried straight through into the name of the result, permanently, where anyone reading it thousands of years later would see it sitting there. Your doubt was never the obstacle you have been treating it as, and it was never going to be absent. It sat in the record from the beginning, face down on the ground, laughing. The only question the story actually puts to you is what you answer to for the next year. If you want this worked out properly rather than sold to you, the Goddard Code is where I do that. A single piece of Neville Goddard's law per video, taken slowly, with nothing promised that cannot be delivered. Subscribe and stay with it. Then do one thing in the comments. Tell me what you currently answer to. Skip the name you would like to have. Give me the one that arrives on its own before you have time to manage it. Saying that out loud is most of the work, and I suspect you will be surprised by how crowded that comment section gets. He was 99, face down on the ground, laughing at the arithmetic. And he was already called the father of a multitude.